The discussion over here is the following. Let's first do the summary, then we'll go to practical application. On Shabbat, one is not allowed to cook. That is unquestionably clear that any piece of food that is not fully cooked, no matter how many coverings you put on the fire, no matter how many coals you took away, or how many knobs you covered, as many blechs that you took, you're not allowed to return something that's uncooked on the fire on Shabbat, or any liquid that cooled down, you're not allowed to put it back on the fire on Shabbat. There's no question about that. That is clear. What we are discussing today is something that is fully cooked, like a raw piece of chicken, or a very hot water, a raw piece of chicken,
a cooked
piece of chicken. Then, actually, we're not even going to discuss that today. That means, let's say you took it off the fire. There's going to be certain cases that you put it back on the fire as long as the fire is covered. But we didn't even have time to get into that. How do you return something back on the fire? We didn't speak about that. What we got to is the first part. How could you keep something on the fire on Shabbat? So what we mentioned is the following. That the Gemara tells us that you shouldn't put a tafshil, the dafina, on the fire before Shabbat unless you do garuf v'katum. And there was a difference of opinion between Hananya and the Hachamim what that meant. Hananya was of the opinion that you can't return something on the fire unless it's covered. But you're allowed to have something there before Shabbat as long as it's half cooked. And the Chachamim said you're never allowed to keep something. When it says in the Mishnah, you're not allowed lo yiten unless it's garuf v'katum, it means you're never allowed to keep something on the fire, even if it's fully cooked. You're never allowed to keep it there. And the reason why is because we're afraid that you're going to move the fire on Shabbat and you're going to make a prohibition because people are always worried about their flame. That's what the topic we discussed today. Now, practical applications, we said that we follow Hananya's opinion. We're lenient. And we say you're allowed to keep on the flame a pot that is halfway cooked and up, because then it's already halfway cooked and it's on the flame. We're not worried that you're going to stoke the flame, and you don't even need a covering on the flames for that. And we mentioned, let's say it's less than halfway cooked. If you put in a raw piece of meat, the Gemara said it's also okay because that showed that you don't care about the food and you are not going to come to stoke the fire on Shabbat. So far, so good? Now, what happens if you don't have a raw piece of meat and the chulent, the dafin, aka dafina, is not cooked? It's not even halfway cooked yet. It's not ma'achal ben drasai. It's not halfway cooked. What are you allowed to do? You have to actually do something to the flame. So there's two options. You could buy yourself a Shabbos hot plate, which usually in this shiur we have Chuck El Nekave from Israeli Source on Doncaster. He'll sell you whatever you want. Yeah? Regarding the hot plates. He sells hot plates. What's the big deal? Well, what's this hot plate?
It's one temperature only.
Basically, a hot plate is that there's no... What's the whole gzera? What's the whole prohibition? That we were afraid that you might come to stoke the fire. By a hot plate, there's nothing you could do about it. You know what you would have to do? You'd have to unscrew it and put in some more electricity. You're not able to. Yeah, well, yes. Okay, that's because low plug. That's because they didn't want to make a difference between that and that. But the accepted opinion, we follow Rav Ovadia Yosef over here. And Rav Ovadia Yosef is of the opinion that a hot plate, he says like this. He says very logically, Rav Ovadia Yosef says, it's called a plata shel Shabbat. It's called a hot plate of Shabbat. Obviously you're not going to come to do anything. It's all made just so that you should know you can't stoke any fire. So he says, you could put in whatever you want on that hot plate before Shabbat. As long as, we're not talking about, once again, taking and putting back on the fire. That's going to be next Thursday. We're going to learn about that. This week, we're learning about just keeping it on the fire, or stage 1. Next week is going to be stage 2. Stage 1 is about having that pot stay before Shabbat. If it is a hot plate, it's allowed. Now, let's say you don't have a hot plate. there's your oven top, your stove top. There's two options. Some opinions say it's enough to cover the knobs. Why? Because by covering the knobs, you show that you're not going to come to turn. Like, what's going to happen? Oh, I might want to make the cholent hotter. You're going to remind yourself, and you're not going to do it.
You pull the knobs out.
However, or you pull the knobs out. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said you don't have to do that. You could leave the knobs the way they are. But you have to do something to the fire. You have to show that you don't care about the fire. Once you showed, he said the logic behind what Chachamim wanted, they didn't want you to put a wall around it. They wanted you to show that you don't care so much about this tafshil. So if you threw something raw in there, if you put in ashes, if you rake the coals, that's what they wanted you to do. So if you put a sheet of metal on the fire, even if it doesn't cover the knobs, the sheet of metal does not have to cover the knobs.
But a piece of foil will cover the knobs.
So you don't have to cover the knobs, or Moshe Feinstein says you have to put a sheet of metal on top of the flame. You show that this is not a flame that you usually cook or that you're going to do something with. Then you're allowed to keep the fire on before Shabbat. So the Rav Moshe Feinstein said, so there's two approaches. Either one you do is fine. Either you put the sheet of metal on the fire, or you cover the knobs. Now we're going to see next shiur that the best thing to do is to put the blech, because then what's going to happen is that you're also going to be able to return the fire on, as long as the food is fully cooked. I only said this like 5 million times. As long as the food is fully cooked, that's when you're going to be able to return it back, because then there's no problem with bishul. There's going to be, next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to learn about the prohibition of, not that you might come to stoke the flames, but something that looks like cooking. Mehzik mevashel. If somebody's going to come on Shabbat and see you take things and put back on the fire, you're going to think you're cooking. That's going to be another purpose why you have to have the flame covered. To be continued next week, Be'ezrat Hashem. Same place, same time. It's a ta'anit. It's a fast day next week on Thursday. That means we're not going to offer breakfast. We're not going to offer. It's not that we're trying to save money. It's that we're not going to offer breakfast. And after, so we're going to go straight. We're going to go to the learning. It's January 1st. Don't get too drunk.